I don't have that seat anymore. Right. Please welcome to the stage, the Peter Pan of porn, Mr. Jake West. The Robin Hood of video, self-confessed, Marc. And you saw him in the documentary, David Hyman from the BBFC. I've slagged him off for years, but he always comes back to me. Are you wearing the same shirt? Yes. Is that because you didn't think we were going to recognise you?
Marc's got Alan's suit on.
I'm separately sure. Right, let's start. On a serious note, you raised quite a lot of really, horrifying issues in this, I think. Did you realise, again, because you said you looked at you went to the BBFC and you looked in their files, and that's where you found the list. This is going to be based on the other two.
Well, no, that was a Section 3 list.
Section 3 list.
And we thought, well, we can't just put more trailers out, we might as well have another documentary to go with the first one. We'd extend the period of time that it covered. And at first, we thought it wasn't as exciting, but when you look back, it was pretty bad, just as crazy as the video Nasties scare in the early 80s.
Did many of you realise that how scary it was to actually collect videos at that time? Because the police, you really were, prone to sort of like them coming around at 5 o'clock in the morning.
I had to hide mine under the bath. I had to have secret panels everywhere for tapes. It's just really, really scary. And you'd hear from friends would phone up and say, "Oh, there's going to be some raids on Monday morning. Hide your tapes." You don't know how they heard about it, but it's just like, where can I put them all? Which ones are they going to take? And somebody just pointed out to me over here that the link they make between like paedophilia and video Nazis was absolutely incredible, because they said they were doing right ads in the same magazine. It was that sort of like juxtaposition that was always a problem. I was just trying to make this look bad, weren't they?
It was just really, really awful the way they did. Just go through a bit of it. I mean, did the whole story evolve as you were going along, and did you have a sort of a clear-cut picture?
It was interesting because after we did the first documentary, we covered, when I did the first documentary, we covered the period up to the enacting of the Video Recordings Act, and I'd started doing some interviews about what it was like when the BBFC basically started censoring videos, and it became clear at the end of the first documentary that I couldn't just create that as like a 5 and 10 minute section. It was an entire thing in itself. So that was what led to us thinking, well, maybe we could follow the story on post the Video Recordings Act. So basically, I mean, I think you can watch the two, I think, back to back, and it's almost like one continuous film, I would say, really, because it just follows. It's just following the history, and the more we delved into it, the more we began to sort of think, oh, hold on, there is a story here. But it took a while, because there's quite a lot of separate incidents which sort of had this sort of head of steam, which built up to, like what you see there, and it seems ridiculous when you watch it now.
And also, the James Furman era is what it actually boils down to. I mean, David, did you see that? Is it like just a non-stop argument against the Furman era, do you think? How do you see it from the BBFC point of view?
I don't think so. I think it's quite well balanced in the sense that it shows that James Furman was so often caught between a rock and a hard place. His instincts were to sort of support filmmakers in way, because he'd been a filmmaker, so he felt that he could identify with them. Also, he had to obviously serve the public trust and also the will of Parliament. So he couldn't really please anybody most of the time, because those who sort of said there should be more censorship thought he was being too liberal, and those who thought there should be less thought he was being, well, as the title has it, too draconian. But obviously these acts of Parliament had come in. They had come in to address an identified pressing social need by those of our elected representatives, and they legislated, I said, twice in a very short space of time. The board was empowered to carry out the will of Parliament. One of the things was to seek to avoid classifying material which might fall foul of the criminal law. Now that actually protected distributors, but the board, as I say in the documentary briefly, couldn't set aside the laws of the land, however archaic some of them may appear to be, because if we had done, then the distributor could be put in the position of being prosecuted and say, well, hang on a minute, you're supposed to stop me being prosecuted, and you're not. So the board was erring, I would say, on the side of caution, but that was in the context of the times, which obviously these acts had been enacted in response to what was perceived to be an unregulated market, and a lot of the films were those of the horror variety. That's where like, the DPP's famous list came from, because those were sort of films that were being seized. So going back to your question, James Furman, when he started, he was just dealing with film, and suddenly in the mid-80s, the workload of the board took an upswing and increased significantly, and suddenly there was all manner of films and type of material coming in, which the board hadn't faced, certainly not for a number of years, probably since the 1970s, that sort of extreme material. And some of that had been submitted by people, distributors who bought a package of movies and had to submit everything in order to sort of get their money back for getting something rejected. So that had actually happened in the 70s. But there was a huge volume of work coming in, and as I said, he had to tread a very careful path between trying to respect the filmmaker's intentions and also to serve the trust of Parliament and the public. And it's a difficult tightrope to walk, and many would argue it still is today.
For me, there's a sort of a bit of an addenda to the right to reply stuff that I did, because although I don't think you show it, there was a guy on that television programme who would literally just slag me off. He actually called me the living dead at one point. Cut to 20 years later, that guy was actually put into prison for beating up his wife and abusing his children, and I actually thought, there you go, that said it all, another hypocrite. And I was really, really quite pleased about that. Really, I was really, really so shocked, because he really went for me, really badly.
I did, in an earlier version of the cut, I did have it in.
You did have it in?
But I couldn't really make it.
No, it would make no sense. Yeah. No. I mean, so it's a 3-disc set again, and you've got another 2 discs with the.
Yeah, we're going to have similar set to like the first set. Instead of the DPP section 2 title, it's section 3 this time, which not many people knew about. But that's what we discovered when we were researching.
Right.
So it was stuff that was liable for forfeiture but not prosecution.
And although you say, can you go on? Could you do a third one and take in the whole Serbian movie, Bunny Game, Human Centipede?
When we were doing interviews, we did talk to a lot of people about, there's been a bit of a flutter of a scare about certain films, like the Serbian film Human Centipede, and we did cover that, but it didn't fit into this because it was it's like a huge, like sort of 13-year gap between 1999 and then you can't just jump into 2012. Because the board is very, very different, and I think those things are more blips now, whereas back then it was a constant thing. So whether we carry on doing another thing, I don't know. It depends. It'd be more interesting to see.
It might be another scale.
Yeah, but if people sort of want to know more, then maybe we'll think about it. But the intention with this one was just to get this story told, and it's like a relief to finally sort of exercise it.
Let me ask David one more thing before we hand it over to you. I mean, there was that thing recently that said the BBFC were going to be looking again at horror movies in the context of, did they actually affect people? I mean, what did that mean?
No,
it's quite a scary thing.
This was part of the new guidelines, which actually came into they came into effect last Monday, actually, 24th of February. And they came into effect as a result of a significant amount of research which involved over 10,000 people, and their findings fed into it because the document is actually supported and underpinned by research and consultation of the public. And one of the concerns was that the sort of tone and theme of a film can be more important than detail. Whether someone gets stabbed 2 or 3 times is less important, they felt, at say 12A and 15 than the tone and theme. So this is something we would give perhaps more weight to than we had done in the past. There are a number of other things that came out of it. It didn't mean there's going to be a wholesale sea change, because tone and impact, for those of you who've looked at previous guidelines, were actually incorporated in the guidelines due to previous research, which also sort of found this to be a significant factor in people's concerns. So it's difficult to say until we get the films in, but it's already been the case in this country, and Alan would know this as well, where films that perhaps had a PG-13 in the States, World War Z, for example, and most recently the quiet ones, PG-13s in the States, are actually 15 rated over here. And obviously distributors in some cases, obviously the studios have said to them, get a 12A for this, because that's where our audience is, it's PG-13. But because the public have told us they are concerned with issues of tone and impact, and where the films may not show that much graphic visual detail, but are pervasively horrific or scary, they're horror films, that's what they're supposed to be. Those concerns are reflected in the way in which we classify them, and often they'll get 15s, and the distributor may come back, I'm not saying in the case of quiet ones I mentioned, but in case of some films they may come back and say, look, what do we have to take out to get a 12A? And we'll say, it's not a question of detail, it's a question of tone, theme, and impact. So that's kind of what it meant. It reinforced, really, what we were doing. And yes, that is something we will give more weight to, perhaps, than we have done in the past. But until you get the films coming in, you don't know how, you can't speak hypothetically until you actually view them. That's really what it meant. Unfortunately, I think it got reported in a particular way. And then, as happens, particularly if something goes on the internet, the first site that reports it is the one that everybody else copies, rather than going onto our website and looking at our press release, which actually explained what it was. The immediate cry was, there's going to be more horror censorship, back to the bad old days. Well, we never said that at all. But unfortunately, that's how it was interpreted. And, the internet, so these things can spread like wildfire. They can get around the world literally in an instant. So that's what actually happened.
But even so, I actually went on, I've gone on a couple of radio shows. I'm doing a lot of sort of like Video Nasties anniversary things at the moment. And people are still going on about the Alton report. I mean, they still say that. It's now entered popular thinking as being what it is.
Well,
and it was never, ever anything, as you pointed out here. It was just completely like a pack of lies.
The Charles Play 3 issue, the government's representative in the House of Lords read into the public record, and it's there on the internet for anyone who wants to find it, that no connection was established whatsoever, as Craig explains in the film. Unfortunately, it's the old thing about, a lie's got halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. And unfortunately, as well as and there's also the print the legend aspect, where if something is said, often enough,
Right.
that people will just say, oh yes, Child's Play 3, that's the one that made, those two boys killed James Baldwin. That, unfortunately, was reported so much, so frequently, that if people go on the internet, you can find those reports quite quickly. The government's representative reading into the House of Lords in the public record, there was no connection, got far less coverage, obviously, than the...
But the media don't report that. This is the problem, isn't it? It's always been about the media in this case. I mean, they really sort of were so vile. Someone that sells newspapers doesn't really...
But also back then it was very difficult to have a response to the media, because if it was in the newspapers or television, it was very difficult to have a voice then. And if you were a horror fan, nobody wanted to listen to you anyway, back in the 90s. The internet has certainly changed the way that people can share their opinions, and I don't think that... You weren't really represented, were you?
No, in my case, because I was writing for magazines then, people were very wary of actually saying something to me, because they actually thought I would then go and sort of like use that as a platform, which I often did. So it was actually interesting how I didn't get as much flack as I obviously thought that you lot would have done, like a general sort of horror fan.
But when you went on that show, for instance, there were very few people that would step up to defend
No,
in the first place, because you were being branded as being weird
Yes.
to start off with. And I think the media...
People have called me a pervert for years, I think. No, it was very difficult. So behind me, probably was Stefan Jaworzen, who did Shock Express, but you didn't use any of his footage.
No, he didn't want to be interviewed.
Yeah.
We wanted to get him.
Probably David Alton.
Really?
David Alton lied there, but didn't get back to us.
Was there anybody else who wouldn't be in it? Did you ask?
So many people, I just can't remember.
Yeah, we
Contacted so many people over the years.
But it's funny that people like Alton, who made the most noise, don't then want to come back.
They now
won't look at it
completely.
Again.
It did what it did for them at the
Exactly,
time. Got their
I
agenda.
think actually the point about media is interesting, because at the time when all this furore started, there was a public concern about the unregulated market and unregulated availability of videos. How great that was, obviously, you'd have to research and find out. The newspapers tapped into that concern and those fears, and it's called cultural values. They sort of understand their readership and they cater to that. So there was a sense that they had tapped into something that was a concern. What they then did with it, obviously, we can all sit here and debate as to whether it exaggerated, it distorted, or whatever, but there was a concern they were reflecting in the early 80s when there was an unregulated market. Had there not been, they couldn't have run with that for so many years and for so long and made so much capital out of it. So I think there was a genuine concern there.
But I think what happened though is that when it did become regulated,
They still
and
refer to it.
I think the problem was that it became overly regulated to the point where if we wanted to watch horror films, like gory horror films, we basically we had to become criminals to do that. So therefore, just by owning a tape, we were then in possession of what was regarded as an obscene article. So what was absurd is like the law created the whole subculture based around the idea that you were becoming a criminal because you wanted to watch a horror film. And I think that's where it went wrong in my view.
You're making the argument that guilty until proven innocent. The idea was that if you had this, then you were intending supply, and you had to prove that you weren't, which is that's the point I think people are making in the film itself.
Let's hand it over to you. So look, I mean, you must have. Please ask anything you like. Go at the back there. Yes, you.
So, I was going to say, in the 90s, I used to love, before like Texas Chainsaw Exorcist were released again, that you could watch some movie documentaries and actually see more clips and things in the back and read. So I noticed there's a clip in that for something that has been released by Shameless recently, and we still don't have that clip in the film. Was there anything you wanted to use that you couldn't use because of censorship just now?
Was there anything you couldn't use? Could you put something that had been censored in?
Well, the thing is that most of the clips in there are stuff which was cut at the time.
Oh, I see.
That's the thing. Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, if we had been watching that in the 80s or early 90s, that would be illegal.
You'd be all in prison.
Yeah. But stuff like the shot of even Rambo where the kid's got the knife, that was taken out. Yeah, so I mean, we were going to do a thing where every time we had a clip, we were going to say what was cut, but it just seemed obvious that was the case, you know. So, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those weird things. But the law obviously has changed about a lot of these things. You know, and it's like when Carol Topolsky talks about the new Ripper. At that point, they were adamant that would never be released.
Well, when she finished it, I showed her the Blu-ray. Marc said, look, it's been released on Blu-ray now. I couldn't believe it. Even with cuts, she couldn't believe it.
I took a day trip to Belgium to see that movie because it was showing everywhere uncut there. So that review I did back then in Starbucks was based on a day trip on Brittany Ferris to go over and see it.
Real sort of Brink VHS.
Yes, amazing. Mr. Man down the front there.
One of the things I really liked in the documentary is when you were talking about the communities and that formed around this. I was a bit too young for, I think I was 15 when, James Furman stepped down on that. But for that brief year, when I got into videos and that, I used to go to the Psychotronic store. That's where I got all my videos from. And obviously now and that, because that was a lot of videos were unavailable to get, so you had to go to the older people to get the goods in there. With like the internet, where everything is now, you can just download stuff, you can stream, buy online and that. Do you feel like, even though it's good now that you've got access to all these movies that you could never get 10 years ago, but do you feel like something has been lost?
Yeah, well, I think what's changed is that the community was built on the fact that these things were hard to find, and I do feel that people, like, it could take you years sometimes to track down a film you wanted to see. Then you might see it and it would be rubbish, or it'd be really good. But I do think that created, and that's what the bit about the kind of fan section, it did create a community. And I think, the fanzines now would just be somebody's website. But the difference with the fanzines is that people would print them and they would go out and they would meet up with people. And I think the internet has just made everything less interactive in a real world way. But obviously, you can see anything you want now. So on the one hand, you have access to all the material, but on the other hand, it's because it's easy, it doesn't mean so much. So that's why, one of the reflections that Alan says at the end, it was like a cultural, it's a sort of a very British thing where, ironically, it made us the people we are because we sort of fought the law or whatever.
You go to kids fair, when you go out to the car park and open the car boot, you'd be all trading tapes. So you go to like shop at 9 o'clock and you could bring a bag of tapes to trade. And that's how you met people. What a great young food and panic, remember those days? Meet up with people in there.
But I think, obviously technology has completely changed censorship because even if something is banned now, it's only a click away and you can see whatever you want, so it's irrelevant. I mean, the beheading videos or whatever. All this idea of, the fact that the police were always saying that these things are snuff movies, and they clearly were. But now, if you want to see
a snuff movie,
you can see it online.
So the thing with that is there have always been ways of circumventing anything. When you had banned books, people would bring them in through customs. Videos, people would go to the States to bring in their copies of Clockwork Orange. Obviously, there is always that sort of marginal aspect to anything. Even when films were banned, they were smuggling in 16mm prints of things like Deep Throat. People said, it's been screened. So you will always have that. Anything that's illegal, if people want, there is going to be some part of society that will actually find ways to obtain. So it's nothing.
I remember the video company when they wanted to release Last House on the Left, had to smuggle it in under the name Krug and Company, the original title. I always remember that because that's what it was on. Because I actually went there and they actually transferred it. Yeah. Sag, or is it? Let's just in a minute.
Sorry, me in a minute? Or
You now.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one of the most memorable moments of my teenage years wasn't going to the pub or seeing a race. One of the monthly video glosses actually printed the titles of 55 banned movies by the DPP. Was it 55? It could be less, but I remember it's 55. And effectively that list of movies perpetuated the 10 or 15 years of collecting, going underground. And you asked for memories, but in my in response to what you said at the end, I felt the era ended. Again, it would have been about 1999 when I saw My Spit on Your Grave in the bargain bin at Tesco. Dawn of the Dead being given away free with the Sunday Express. And
yeah, exactly. And Britain changed so much after that.
It is true though that I always said that list was the checklist for every fan to go through and say, right, got to see this. That was their biggest mistake they made.
Just mentioning, going back to regards to the way that you can always see something, you always could. I mean, it's totally more relevant now. The moment a press release goes out that says that you've banned Human Centipede 2, it's not a matter of going to Belgium or... I mean, it's so easy now. Do you consider, as a member of BBFC, that your time now is, as a business, it's limited, isn't it? Because you're going to have to move slowly into the advisory capacity rather than the actual banning of movies. Because you know the moment you ban a movie, that pretty much everyone that wants to see that movie will see it probably quicker than if you didn't ban it.
Well, to answer the last part of the question first,
Yeah.
the advisory aspect of it has been an aspect of the board's work for a number of years with what you probably know as consumer advice, what is actually BBFC Insight, where you get the short form describing very briefly what the contents of the film are, and then a longer form explaining in a few sentences what is in that film. That's recently been tweaked and slightly changed, so now people have smartphones and look at films that we've actually classified in the last week or so, they'll see it's in different form. The public want information. Whenever we do our research, 95% of the public in our last bit of research actually said that they check the classification certificates of films before watching them with their under 15s. 89% said they agree with the classification certificates. 89% said that they believe it was necessary, 92% said they agree with these certificates. There's still a significant body of public desire to have some trusted form of classification advising them of what the contents of works are. I said the government has legislated in this area twice in the last, more than a quarter century now. They haven't repealed any of those acts. They are your elected representatives. They obviously feel there is still public support, and our own research suggests that there is. In terms of effectiveness, I go back to what I previously said. There have always been ways of getting around it. If someone is determined to watch anything they want to, they will find ways of doing that, just as they will find ways of reading books that were banned in the past, horror comics, etc. So, whilst I would say the means of delivery has changed radically, there is still a public desire for a body. I would say it's us at the moment, it could be somebody else tomorrow, we could be de-designated, but there is still a public wish to have somebody giving them that information. So we will continue as long as the public wishes to. Sam?
Just a quick one. It's just about the bootleg section of the documentary and the fanzines. When you were getting all the material for that together, did you find any material on any of the mixtapes that were circulating during the 1990s?
Any of the what?
Any of the mixtapes, like newsreel footage and real life atrocities that were circulating, and what would be your opinion on those?
I used to put together trailer tapes myself. Or, when you did copies of people, you put loads of trailers at the end, wouldn't you? To say, here's what else I've got. So that's really what it came down to back in those days.
Marc, those shots of all those magazines, most of them are Marc's still copying from that in. But I think people just used to put any crazy stuff on the end of the tape. That famous thing, that guy shooting himself.
Yeah, American Gulag.
American Gulag, and that used to circulate in the way that I think something on the internet would. Do you know what I mean? But it was spread sort of slow. People would go, "Oh, you've got to see this," and you did see like a tape of it. So.
Question for yourself, Alan, and to David as well. Actually, that we go back to the Great Shock Around the Clock years, and the question I want to ask is, a lot of the films that were shown. You mentioned Necromantic 1 year. We couldn't actually be in that event. Were special licenses required to actually show those films there? And from David's perspective, what was the BBFC's interest in events such as that? Was there an interest?
Well, first off, the Scala where we had Shop Around the Clock was in Camden Town, which had a completely set. We weren't under Westminster Council regulations. Where we are at the Empire in Frightfest anyway, that's why we have all the problems we've had with Westminster City Council. Whereas if we literally just went over the road, Tottenham Court Road, to like the Odeon Covent Garden or something, we wouldn't have any of those problems. So
you could have shown them
we and also back then, because did we get you just to ask to join like as a membership? Wasn't it a membership thing? I think, yeah, it was a cinema club. That's how we got out of it. So we could show you anything we liked. So I remember that's what it was. Yeah, but you had to join a membership cardy thing. And from your point of view, it was under your radar. We weren't there, but it was under the radar.
No, the actual power to show unclassified films is actually under the terms of the Licensing Act. The Licensing Act is controlled by local authorities, so therefore on film, what the board does is a delegated function of the local authorities' responsibilities. Instead of having hundreds of different local authorities all saying, we'll see that film, we'll give it a 50, we'll give it a 12A, if you want a 12A, you have to cut this. we provide our certificates for advice. In practice, most of those advisory ratings are ratified consciously by the actual councils themselves. They can uprate, they can downrate, they can ban films in areas. Crash, obviously, was banned in Westminster effectively because they might get cut and will be shown in Camden round the corner. So therefore, I mean, Alan will know more about this. What with film festivals, the local authority may want you to submit a list of titles and a brief synopsis of that work. Now, what you couldn't do is say, for example, if you're going to show a Serbian film, say, a Johnny Jake set in Eastern Europe, because that would be seen as deceitful, as they do. But so you have to be honest with them. They can, intervene if something's come up on their radar, presumably, or they see something that they think, hang on a minute, maybe this shouldn't be shown. They can ask for it to be shown, or say you can only show this if it's given a certificate by the BBFC.
Westminster Council.
It's their responsibility ultimately under licensing Act, so they have final say. So that tends to be how it works. The same way the London Film Festival, they send a list of titles.
They've requested very few films to show, but we have shown them and gone, oh, okay. And it's basically my fault because I've written the programme notes and I've made it sound fabulous. They go, is it really as grim as that? So that's the problem there. Sorry, who else? Yes. Get away with it.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a comment that this documentary for me has been a real eye-opener because when I was growing up in Spain in the 80s and 90s, we have no censorship whatsoever. So my first beautiful film was when I was 11 years old on national television at dinner time. In like 1986 or 87. So I felt that I always knew that you were much more tough and things like that, but I've been gobsmacked completely.
It isn't.
You go to jail for that. I don't understand why.
Yeah.
Why so provocative?
It's been very hard to actually tell people, like in America especially, they don't get it. They think, how did this happen? And it's really hard.
When we showed the first documentary around Europe, they just thought it was a mockumentary. It really happened.
I know it's true, obviously. I lived here long enough for that, but it does look totally like a mockumentary. As I said to you, I used to see these movies uncut, daytime.
Exactly,
and 90 conferences I was fantasized.
Oh, no, it is incredible having those people. It's mainly Americans who say to me, how did this happen? It is crazy, absolutely crazy.
I don't understand why that extreme link they made with violent movies and kids. Because I remember being a kid and the murder of that little boy in the news, obviously, and the association with child play and that. All across Europe, we've got a much more liberal legislation, and things are not working here. So I don't understand how they justify
Well,
we're protecting our children.
No, and neither do we.
Well, to just address that, there is actually sort of history. If you go back 100 years or so, you've got issues like concerns over the spread of the music halls, penny dreadfuls, in the 50s, horror comics, pulp magazines, television, virtually anything. There have been concerns over popular culture. Now, academics have written books, they've been studies made into this, but it's not just basically related to what you've just seen. This does go back a number of decades, almost centuries, to concerns about popular culture, and obviously if you read up on it, you'll see the roots of that and how that manifested itself. So it's not merely that this was a manifestation of those concerns that have always certainly been there for a considerable amount of time.
I think it now is quite a repressed society. I think that's what David Cronenberg pointed out, I think, quite astutely back in the 80s, is that for whatever reasons you didn't have it in Spain, and society wasn't destroyed because of these videos. In the UK, there's always been some feeling that they have to blame something else, or I don't know, it's very strange.
We've only got time for another question, I'm afraid, because you can ask these to anything you like afterwards, but we've got to move on. So let's go to the guy in the blue.
Yeah, hi. When I was 16, I had the dubious pleasure of, my first job was in a backstreet video shop, and about 3 weeks in, I had the job of sticking all the BBFC's certificate labels on, that everyone thought at the time would save all their video shop collections, which didn't. And then we got raided. And it was a terrifying thing, like being 16 and having 4 guys walk in and then show you badges, plain clothes. They took loads of under-the-counter porn, not surprisingly, but then they were basically going along all the shelves and they were taking films down. And the only good thing about it, I'm just telling you this I always was quite proud. I'd stuck an 18 certificate on a Warner Brothers Exorcist copy, and so I managed to save. It's almost like my little stupid as this moment. I saved it. So I was just wondering if you got a lot of those sort of stories where you've been doing these sort of things from those sort of backstreet, small independent.
I told them one yesterday, which they didn't know, because I used to work for Video Media, one of the very first video companies, hence why all the Argento and stuff came out. But one of the films we had, of course, was the classic family tale Black Beauty. And I always remember the police coming around and saying, hang on a minute, what is this? They actually thought it was some sort of porno. I just could not believe, that's where the disconnect was, that they actually were so focused, they just could not see that it was actually that story.
That's why they took films like the Big Red One.
Big Red One, do you remember that one as well? The Big Red One.
Whorehouse in Texas.
Yeah, that's Whorehouse in Texas. It's a fabulous musical. I think that's what they do. But listen, guys, thank you so much. I'm so glad you liked it. We're going to be doing something like this again in July at the Prince Charles, I think. That's right. It's the launch of things. So if you're in London, come along there. You'll hear loads more from them. And thank you, Jake, Marc, and David.